Antarctica is the only place on Earth where the 21st century sometimes behaves as if someone has switched it off. We have satellites, open maps, cameras that can see tracks in the snow. But as soon as the conversation turns to the icy continent, transparency breaks. Two completely different worlds float up in your mind. The first is the official one. Research stations, discipline, logistics, weather windows, radio protocols, sanitary rules, strict routes, and caution. Because a mistake on the ice is very expensive. The second is the unofficial one. Restricted areas, zones where you just cannot go, stories about men in suits, pilots' accounts of strange objects, satellite anomalies, and the feeling that some topics around Antarctica live in a mode of eternal whisper. And here's the question from which real intrigue almost always begins. Why are there so many legends around one continent, and why do they not die for decades? What is there that makes even experienced people sometimes suddenly start speaking more quietly? Rumors come in waves and repeat like a motif in music. Back in the 1930s of the 20th century, ideas begin to surface in conversations and behind the scenes that Antarctica may be not just ice, but a place where someone would like to gain a foothold for a long time. In 1946, the United States sends a large expedition there, known as Operation High Jump. On paper, it is supposed to last for months. In reality, it is abruptly curtailed, officially because of the weather. Unofficially, they encountered something. In the 1980s and 1990s, in retellings of military pilots, metallic discs appear that jump out from behind mountain ranges and disappear at speeds that are unlike aircraft. In 2018, scientific experiments with particles and balloon probes produce strange signals that some interpret as if they are coming from below, as if part of what is happening is not above the continent, but under it. All of this could be written off as tall tales if these stories did not feature people with professions that usually do not like drama. Pilots, engineers, rescuers, military logisticians, scientific teams. That does not make the legends true, but it makes them viscous, because a legend gets a carrier who looks like a real witness. And we will start with one such story, the one that most often sounds like a clamp that holds half of the Antarctic myths together. The Vanished Station. In Marie Birdland, the camp is there. The people are not November 1995. In retellings, a C-130 Hercules military transport aircraft appears, having taken off from McMurdo Station, one of the main nodes of American logistics in Antarctica. On board are the crew and an engineer who in open mentions is called simply Brian. No surname, no biography. That is either an attempt to protect the person or a sign of the legendary layer, but we record it as it is. The task looks routine. Check a scientific camp in the area of Marie Birdland, West Antarctica, a place so remote that even an ordinary emergency there turns into a long and expensive operation. A few days earlier, 15 scientists had been dropped off there. The protocol is simple and brutal. Radio contact every day. Radio is not a convenience. It is the oxygen of the story. Because in Antarctica, there are places where 2 days without contact is no longer, we could not get through. It is, something happened. And now, it is already the second day. Silence. The aircraft reaches the area. The weather, by local standards, is almost ideal. Visibility is bearable. The wind is not tearing the machine apart. Turbulence is moderate. The crew circles descending lower and lower, and the camp appears. And not something that looks like a camp, but a camp as if it had been arranged for a photograph. The huts and snow walls stand as if along a ruler. The fuel tanks are in place. The snowmobiles are neatly lined up. The equipment is laid out with that very northern pedantry that field teams love. And here comes the detail that makes the scene cold. There is not a single person in the camp. No movement, no signals, no smoke, nothing. The C-130 lands nearby. Inspection begins according to the manual. There are no signs of struggle, no weapons, no bodies, not even normal chains of tracks leading away from the camp. Provisions are enough for weeks and longer. Everything looks as if people stepped out for a minute, and the world erased them with a rubber eraser. The radio's working. This is an important point. Because if communication is functioning, then they could not all have gone together to fix the antenna. And the most important thing is that they have nowhere to go. Without transport and preparation, in such conditions, a person quickly becomes a statistic. Not missing, but impossible. The crew reports to base. The camp is intact. There are no people. The reply from McMurdo in the retellings sounds like mockery of reality itself. Make one more search circle and return. They make a circle. There are no traces of the group, neither on the snow nor from the air. At this point, any rational story could have ended in tragedy. Antarctica is a place where tragedies happen. But what follows makes everything worse. They came back and could not speak. A week later, in different retellings, after several days, after a week, the same crew receives an order. Urgently return to the same area. The reason sounds absurd. The scientists have come back on the air. Voices on the edge of panic. They demand evacuation immediately. The aircraft again lands by the familiar camp, and now the picture is different. Things are not lying as they should, but in haste. Crates, instruments, samples, everything has been thrown onto pallets, without the usual neatness, as if people were packing not for an expedition, but from a fire. The scientists are already at the ramp. They enter the aircraft in silence without looking around and collapse into the seats like people who can no longer hold themselves together. The crew asks questions. What happened? Where were you? Do you need medical help? In response, an empty stare. No explanations, no, we got lost. The people look as if they have returned not from measurements, but from a zone where the brain saw something for which it has no language. 2 hours of flight. And during these 2 hours, according to Brian, not one of the 15 people uttered a single word. Not in a whisper, not into someone's ear, not please. Nothing. Upon arrival, they are told that they are being transferred to another aircraft, but they do not move. Some of them literally have to be unbuckled, lifted by the shoulders, and led out of the aircraft. They walk slowly as if their inner engine has been switched off. Their gaze is glassy, their gait mechanical. After that, according to Brian, he never saw them again. And here the story stops being just scary and becomes suspicious. Quarantine for equipment. When even a camera becomes dangerous. Usually, after an evacuation, the camp is packed up, the equipment is brought back, sorted, and documented. Here, no. According to the accounts, all containers are stacked in a separate room, guards are posted, and a quarantine is declared. It is an unpleasant word. Quarantine of what? Microbes, chemicals, radioactivity, or information? Later, according to Brian, these crates were taken somewhere. In the legends, a well-known facility in the United States surfaces, where sensitive finds allegedly traditionally converge. It sounds like a movie, but it is precisely such details that hold the legend together. It is not about UFOs. It is about the behavior of the system. Because if something is capable of causing panic, it is closed off, removed, frozen. And now, keep this thought in mind. Close, remove, force to be silent. Because the next marker of Antarctic stories is more frightening than discs and pyramids. Men in suits, a marker that frightens more than UFOs. In Antarctic tales, the same scene constantly resurfaces. A person returns to base and thinks that a normal debriefing awaits him. And instead, an office, a closed door, and several men in civilian clothes. No insignia, no names, no familiar military hierarchy. Only the intonation, which does not allow questions. Their phrase almost always sounds the same. You did not see this. You were not there, and you will not talk about it. Why does this work more strongly than any flying saucers? Because it is not about space. It is about power, about control, about how reality is sometimes switched off with a single sentence. And next, there will be an episode where this scene is not a metaphor, but a direct order. The forbidden hole in the ice and guests who do not like publicity when zones appear in the story where you just cannot go. Long before the story with the scientists, Brian, by his own account, carried out routine flights between bases. He called them milk routes, boring logistics, boring coordinates. One day, an urgent assignment comes. Evacuate a wounded specialist from a remote station. The route runs near a point marked as an air sampling station. Around it, a thick circle and the note, "No fly zone." The choice is simple: fly around and lose time, or cut the route. The commander decides to go straight. There is a person on board, and every minute is not a formality, but a life. When the aircraft reaches the area, Brian looks out of the porthole and sees what, according to the logic of the legend, the ban was created for. In the glacier yawns a huge black funnel. In retellings, a diameter of about 100 meters is mentioned. It does not look like a fissure, not like a crater, rather like an organized entrance. Along the edges, there seem to be traces of heavy machinery. The relief around it is disturbed. Chains of tracks go down the slope, as if people and vehicles regularly descend and ascend there. The aircraft passes over the object once, a second time, and flies on. The evacuation is successful. But upon return, the crew is summoned to the command. And here is the scene. In the office, there is an officer and two men in civilian clothes. They do not introduce themselves. They do not clarify. They do not discuss. They speak briefly. You did not see this. You were not there. You will not fly there again. You will never talk about this. It sounds like a cliché, like a script. And that is exactly why it is frightening. Because in life, people speak like this when they know that arguing is pointless. And then, one more stroke that makes the story sticky. The word guests that changes the temperature in the room. After some time, Brian ends up in a dome complex. Scientists and civilian specialists are discussing a flight to that same air sampling station and say that they will go to meet guests. To the direct question, "What guests?" one of the interlocutors, after a pause, replies, "Let us put it this way. I got the impression that we are not talking about people." Pay attention to how this phrase is built. It does not state we saw aliens, it leaves a fog. But this fog is the most dangerous kind. It does not allow the brain to close the scary folder and return to normal life. And now, we approach the next step of the legend, the very one where a word appears that divides the audience into "I do not believe" and "anything is possible." Because what comes next is a door. The black octagon under the ice. The Special Forces Operation. 2003. In the retellings, a flight out of McMurdo. A Special Forces group, the commander's unofficial call sign is Spartan 1. The official legend, reconnaissance near the Beardmore Glacier. Unofficially, find a particular scientist, take him and what he has discovered. Why is and what he has discovered important? Because in such stories there is always an alarming detail. The priority is not the person, but the materials. Photos, samples, data. Everything that can leak. When the group reaches the coordinates, they do not see a camp. The top of a black octagon is protruding from the ice, rising several meters above the surface. Nature can create strange shapes, but symmetry that looks like architecture provokes one reaction in people. This does not look like an accident. The material, according to descriptions, is strange, something between metal and stone. The surface is warm to the touch in the frost. Along the perimeter, symbols that resemble hieroglyphs and Mayan signs at the same time, but match neither the one nor the other. And then comes the detail that makes the story almost physical. A giant door about 7 meters high. The commander pushes it, and the door opens far too easily, as if perfectly balanced. And here, any viewer has the right question. Who builds a giant door under the ice? And why make it so that it opens easily? That kind of thing does not appear by accident. Warmth inside. The icy hell when an entrance should not exist outside. Sub-zero temperatures, a wind that cuts the face, and air that makes every breath prickly. And inside, according to the legend, there is dry warmth. The temperature is like indoors. The eyes adjust to a soft greenish light, and it becomes clear. This is not a small hall. It is a huge hall corridor. The walls seem to glow from within, but no lamps are visible. The space is covered with even rows of signs receding into the depths. The scale is compared sometimes with several football fields, sometimes with areas that are hard to hold in one's head. At the far end, there is that very scientist. He is standing by a ramp, leading even lower and taking measurements. When asked about the scale of the complex, he points down, "This is only the top." And here, the legend takes the next step. If the top is only a reception area, then there are levels below. And if there are levels, then there is an engineering meaning, a system, a purpose. And then the heaviest phrase in the entire story sounds, "The lower levels are supposedly not empty." A reasonable person is obliged to switch on the brakes. Without evidence, you cannot believe such words, but that is precisely why they live on. They are hard to verify, but impossible to forget. And now, if you think that only mysticism remains further on, that is not so. Because next modernity comes into play. Satellites, maps, particle physics. And it is exactly here that legends become especially dangerous. They start hooking on to real facts. Satellites that see too much. Stares, hangars, and images that suddenly become worse. It is hard to explore Antarctica on foot, but we have eyes in orbit. Sometimes they show things that do not fit into a calm explanation. Wide openings and slopes that resemble the entrance to a cave, a tunnel, or a hangar. Tracks nearby as if from heavy machinery. Discoloration of the snow around, as if something warm or active had worked there for a long time. And then comes a favorite plot for theories. After some time, the area on popular services turns out to be covered by an image of poorer quality. Skeptics answer honestly, different satellites, different angles, different weather, compression, algorithms, shadows. All of that is possible. But a mystery has a property. Once a person already doubts, any oddity becomes proof. On other images, people find a face in the ice, or an elongated object resembling a hull that seems to have slid down the slope. Skeptics say, pareidolia, and they are right. The brain loves to recognize faces in chaos. It is an ancient mechanism. But even if half of the anomalies are illusions, the question remains. Why do forbidden zones, stories of military personnel, tales of quarantine, and strange coincidences all exist at the same time? And here we move on to the block where not photos appear, but physics. Strange signals and beams from below. In 2018, experiments tracking high-energy particles, cosmic rays, were operating above the continent. The essence is simple. Some particles come from space, hit the atmosphere, and the instruments record their traces. And in popular retellings, a detail appears that sounds absurd. Some signals look as if they came not from above, but seemingly from inside, having passed through a huge thickness of the Earth. Scientists offer complex explanations and rare effects, and that is normal. Science always first tries to explain the unusual within the framework of the known. But lovers of mysteries immediately say, if the signal is from below, then there is a source there. And at this point, the story again makes a turn. From Antarctica to space. Because there is one more space thread that people like to weave into this pattern. Maps, pyramids, a treaty and warming. Why Antarctica is perfect for legends and for the truth. In 2017, astronomers record the first known object from interstellar space to pass through our solar system. It is given a name that can be translated roughly as a messenger that came first. It is strange in several parameters: an elongated shape, unusual rotation, and one more thing that sparked discussion. On its way out of the system, it showed an acceleration that some interpreted as not quite ordinary. Most scientists look for natural explanations, and that is logical. But in the public imagination, another thought is born. What if it is a probe? What if there are more such probes? What if they choose places where they can hide for a long time? And here, conspiratorial logic returns to Antarctica as the ideal safe, far from the main centers of civilization. Extreme conditions, a natural security system, international treaties, a political lock, enormous masses of ice, a physical lock. It is hard to imagine a more convenient place for a hidden base or a concealed object. But for a legend to become truly resilient, it needs artifacts. And here, maps enter the game. Maps that should not exist: Piri Reis and Orontius Phineas. According to the schoolbook version, Antarctica was discovered in the 19th century. But there is an unpleasant nuance. In discussions, 16th century maps often surface that are interpreted as if they show outlines of southern lands. Most often, they mention the Piri Reis map, 1513. There is debate around it. What exactly is depicted there? How accurate the coincidence is? What sources were used? The Orontius Phineas map, 1531. It is liked because it allegedly shows the southern continent more wholly, including internal details. Skeptics answer clearly. Many coincidences are subjective. Contours can be stretched, and ancient cartographers sometimes drew hypothetical lands. And that is fair. But supporters of mystery ask another question. Why do these plots not die? Why do people return to them again and again, as if there is an irritating lack of something being said? And here a hypothesis appears that sounds like science fiction, but nicely ties many things together. The idea of shifting. Shifting of the Earth's crust. Antarctica has not always been at the pole. Historian Charles Hapgood proposed a radical idea. Not just plate tectonics, slow, but a possible shift of the Earth's crust as a shell relative to the axis. From the point of view of physics, this is contentious, but in terms of plot, it is a key because it explains several things at once. Why Antarctica could once have been warmer, how maps without ice could theoretically appear, why traces of ancient activity could have ended up preserved under kilometers of ice. Then, people usually recall a period of sharp climatic changes at the end of the Ice Age, the Younger Dryas, and the idea of a giant catastrophe about 12,000 years ago. And at this point, the legend begins to look like a puzzle. Maps, shifting, catastrophe, ice, cities, bands, observations. Too smooth? Possibly. But smoothness is not proof of falsehood. Sometimes the world really does fit together strangely. We just rarely admit it. Subglacial pyramids and unexplained structures. Rock or geometry. If you look at photographs and rocky outcrops of Antarctica, sometimes you can see peaks that look pyramidal. Official explanations are calm. Mountain formations, erosion, play of light and perspective. But the alternative version clings to something else, when a shape seems too even, as if its edges had been drawn with a ruler. especially if there is a sense of orientation to the cardinal directions. This is not proof. It is a spark that sets off arguments. What if there is something man-made there? Because if even one such object turns out to be artificial, the history of civilization becomes different. Pyramids and energy. From myths to Tesla. Next usually comes a popular chain. Pyramids are not tombs, but devices, generators, resonators, technologies that we do not understand. Here people often remember Tesla and his ideas of wireless transmission of energy, and they start connecting the dots. If the ancients knew the principle, Tesla tried to repeat it. It is hypothesis upon hypothesis. But the hold works like this. The viewer likes the feeling of a hidden logic of the world, even if there is little evidence. And now attention. In the first part, we heard about the sterile disappearance and silence of the scientists. In the second, about the forbidden entrance and guests. In the third, about maps and pyramids. All of this could have remained a beautiful myth if Antarctica did not have one more layer, a completely real and very earthly one. Subglacial lakes, volcanoes, and warm zones. Not mysticism, but physics. Antarctica is not just an ice sheet. Under the ice, there are volcanic activity, including known volcanic regions. Subglacial lakes, officially confirmed and presumed, geothermal sources that create pockets of warmth. This is no longer legend. This is the reality of geology. And then imagination comes into play. If microorganisms can live for millions of years in such isolated zones, why would people not allow for the idea of closed ecosystems and more complex forms of life? Here it is important to be honest. Mainstream science does not talk about cities, but it does acknowledge under the ice there is water, warmth, cavities, and much is still unknown. And here the most disturbing version appears, the one that even lovers of mysteries are afraid of. What if the civilization has not gone anywhere? When we say ancient civilization under the ice, we usually imagine ruins, petrified cities, dead artifacts, like Pompeii, only on the scale of a continent. But there is a worse thought. What if someone survived? If stable zones with water and warmth exist under the ice, then theoretically, a closed environment can exist there. Yes, that sounds bold, but it is precisely such assumptions that become the fuel of legends. If a place is physically suitable, that means it is suitable for hidden activity. And here Brian's stories begin to sound different. Not like a scary tale, but like a puzzle. Disappearances, forbidden zones, silence, quarantine. But there is one more earthly layer, the political one, and it is real. The Antarctic Treaty, a continent under lock and key. In 1959, states signed the Antarctic Treaty, which turns the continent into a special territory, priority for science, restrictions, control, rules. On paper, it looks like international common sense, but in the perception of mystery lovers, there is a nuance. Despite decades of conflicts and crises, this regime continues to work, and access to some areas is extremely limited. The official reason for such tight control is safety and protection of a fragile ecosystem. That sounds noble, but it is precisely the contrast between the noble wording and the iron restrictions that gives rise to suspicion. What if it is not only about penguins? It is not surprising that in conspiratorial circles, a grim thought lives on. One day a great conflict will begin, not because of oil and borders, but on the day when someone decides to break the access rules for Antarctica. And now, the final twist. Because Antarctica has one more key. It is frightening, but it is real. Warming. A threat or a key to the secrets. Paradoxically, the possible key to Antarctica's secrets is something that many fear: warming and climate change. Even if one argues about the causes, the felt fact for the world is this: the climate is changing. Systems are becoming less stable. What this can mean for Antarctica, if the trends continue: ice will retreat in certain areas. Subglacial lakes and cavities can become more active in terms of water movement. Geothermal zones can manifest themselves more strongly. And most importantly, what has been closed for centuries will begin to show itself. On the one hand, there is a disaster scenario: sea level, coastal cities, climate chaos. On the other, a disclosure scenario. If under the ice there are only rocks, the arguments will end. If there are ruins, the history will have to be rewritten. If there is something active, then human civilization will suddenly turn out not to be the only player in its own film. It sounds grim, but it is exactly the scale that makes this topic so viscous. Against this backdrop, it is not surprising that Antarctica has become the ideal stage for stories. From ancient maps to pilots, from subglacial lakes to special operations, from a black hole in a glacier to a door inside a warm structure. Whether to believe all this or not is a personal question. But there is one detail that is hard to ignore. Many plots, even when the sources are unfamiliar, revolve around the same motifs: forbidden zones, inexplicable silence of official structures, the feeling that something is happening under the ice that people do not like to talk about publicly. And now a question for you, not for those who watch with half an ear, but for those who listen attentively. If you were given the opportunity to look under the ice of Antarctica and see the truth, but on the condition that you would no longer be able to come back, would you take the risk? Think about it, and write in the comments what you consider more likely. We just love scary puzzles, or these legends have a real core that is too inconvenient for publicity. If you want a continuation with a breakdown of specific episodes, maps, real scientific facts, or something we have talked about earlier on the channel, then support the video with a subscription, a like, and a comment with the topic you want to see in the next episode. Thank you for watching, and right now you can go and check out these videos that have appeared on your screen.